The bonfire crackled in the center of the yard, casting orange shadows over the faces that slowly approached, as if entering a temple of memories. Mr. Arthur leaned his trembling hand on Mrs. Eleanor's arm, and the two walked together across the packed earth, feeling the warmth of the flames even from yards away. There was something different about that night. It wasn't just the late autumn chill biting at exposed skin, nor the scent of burning wood filling their nostrils. It was something in their children's eyes, in the way they avoided meeting their gaze for more than a second or two, as if carrying a secret too heavy to bear. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us what city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The symbolic bonfire ceremony was an old tradition in that community nestled in the Appalachian foothills of West Virginia. Every late autumn, families gathered to burn objects representing closed chapters, overcome sorrows, and burdens that needed to turn to ash so that life could move forward lighter. Mr. Arthur remembered when he was a boy, watching his own father toss a yellowed photo of the grandfather he'd never known into the flames, saying it was time to forgive absences that could no longer be mended. That simple gesture remained etched in his memory as a silent lesson on what it means to let go. Mrs. Eleanor squeezed her husband's arm when she spotted their 3 children standing near the makeshift platform. Megan, the oldest, kept her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes fixed on the fire as if seeking courage in the heat of the flames. Robert, the middle child, clutched a thick envelope against his body, trying to look nonchalant but failing miserably. And Julia, the youngest, was restless, her fingers fidgeting endlessly, biting her lower lip with that expression her mother had known since she was a child, guilt mixed with fear. "You're late," Megan said, without looking directly at her parents. "The ceremony is about to start." Mr. Arthur tried to smile, that gentle smile he'd carried for 72 years, made of deep wrinkles and genuine kindness. "We came as soon as we got the message. Robert said it was important for us to be here tonight." Robert swallowed hard. The envelope in his hands seemed to weigh more. The community began to gather around the bonfire. Neighbors of decades, familiar faces, stories intertwined by years of living side by side. Mrs. Sarah, the retired schoolteacher who lived on the corner, discreetly waved to Eleanor. Mr. Jack, the general store owner who had extended credit for groceries to half the families there during tough times, observed everything with those shrewd eyes that seemed to see right through things. And there were also the younger ones, the grandchildren of other families, the children who ran between the adults' legs, without understanding the solemnity of the moment. Eleanor felt something strange when she ran her hand over the purse hanging from her shoulder. It was light, too light. She discreetly opened the clasp and searched for the blue notebook where she wrote everything down: paid bills, appointments, prescriptions, important phone numbers. The notebook wasn't there. She frowned, trying to remember if she had left it at home, but she was sure she had put it in her purse before leaving. She always did. It was her lifeline, her memory meticulously organized on ruled pages. "Eleanor, are you okay?" Arthur asked, noticing his wife's worried expression. "My notebook, it's not here." He didn't have time to respond. Megan climbed onto the makeshift platform and gestured for silence. The bonfire crackled, as if also demanding attention. The murmurs gradually ceased, and the only sound left was the crackling of the flames and the wind rustling the leaves of the surrounding trees. "Good evening, everyone," Megan began, her voice firmer than seemed possible for someone so tense minutes before. "This year, our family wants to use the ceremony in a special way. We want to burn documents that represent a chapter that needs to be closed." Mr. Arthur felt a shiver run down his spine. It wasn't the cold, it was intuition. 72 years of life teach you to recognize when something's off, even if you don't yet know exactly what. Megan continued, "Our parents dedicated their entire lives to working, caring for us, building what we have today. But the time has come for us to recognize that they deserve rest. They deserve to be cared for, protected from worries they no longer need to carry." The words sounded beautiful. Eleanor almost let herself be carried away by emotion, almost believed it was just a gesture of affection from her children. But there was something in the tone, something in Robert's gaze, something in Julia's restlessness that didn't fit. Therefore, Megan held up some papers she had taken from a folder. "We are going to burn these documents that prove our parents' administrative incapacity, not as an accusation, but as a liberation, so they no longer have to worry about bills, decisions, responsibilities." The murmur that spread through the community was immediate. Mrs. Sarah raised a hand to her mouth. Mr. Jack narrowed his eyes. An elderly woman with white hair slowly shook her head, as if recognizing an injustice before fully understanding it. Arthur took a step forward, but Eleanor held his arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Let her finish." It was mother's wisdom, that patience that comes from someone who's seen a lot, suffered a lot, forgiven a lot. Eleanor knew that interrupting at that moment would be giving her children ammunition, would be making her seem exactly what they wanted to portray. A confused old lady, unable to control her own emotions. Robert climbed onto the platform next to his sister. He pulled an official-looking document with stamps and signatures from the envelope. "This contract was signed by our parents a few weeks ago," he announced, his voice slightly shaky. "In it, they agree to transfer the administration of the house and finances to us, their children. It's an acknowledgement that they need help, that they can no longer manage on their own." Arthur felt his throat tighten. The handwriting on the document, seen from afar, didn't look like his. The dates didn't make sense. He had never signed any of that, had never agreed to any of that. He looked at Eleanor and saw the same certainty in her eyes. It was a lie, but how to prove it, how to contradict his own children in front of the entire community without looking like the confused old man they wanted to paint him as. The youngest daughter, Julia, remained on the ground near the platform, her eyes glistening with tears. She didn't go up, she didn't speak, she just stood there, small, trembling, as if she wanted to disappear. Eleanor watched her for a long moment, trying to decipher what was going on in her head. She knew her youngest. She knew every gesture, every expression, every nuance of the face she had helped to shape. And what she saw there was not conviction, it was remorse. A neighbor discreetly approached Eleanor. It was Mrs. Laura, the seamstress who lived 3 houses down, a woman of few words but precise actions. "Eleanor," she whispered, "I found this dropped near the entrance. Is it yours?" It was the blue notebook. Eleanor took the notebook with both hands, as if receiving a piece of herself back. It was intact, no pages ripped out, nothing missing. Someone had tried to make it disappear, but someone else had prevented it. "Where did you find it?" Eleanor asked, her voice low. "One of the children brought it, said they saw the youngest girl drop it." The youngest girl, Julia. Eleanor took a deep breath. So that was it. Julia had taken the notebook, probably at her siblings' behest, but hadn't been able to get rid of it. She dropped it on purpose, perhaps, an act of silent resistance, a plea for forgiveness, disguised as an accident. On the platform, Megan and Robert continued their charade. They spoke of protection, of care, of filial love. Each word sounded hollower than the last. The community listened in. Silence, but their gazes were no longer supportive. They were suspicious. Mr. Jack approached Arthur. "Arthur, did you sign anything in the last few weeks?" "No, Jack. Nothing. Robert came to me last month. Wanted me to sign a statement saying you two were confused, that you couldn't manage your lives anymore. I sent him packing." Arthur closed his eyes for a moment. The betrayal had deeper roots than he imagined. His children hadn't planned this overnight. They had prepared the ground, tried to recruit allies, built a narrative of incapacity that didn't exist. 72 years, 51 years of marriage. 3 children raised with sacrifice, with love, with sleepless nights and days of hard work. And this was how it ended, with a public charade, with falsified documents, with an attempt to turn them into useless old folks who needed to be protected from their own rights. Eleanor walked slowly to the center of the yard, stopping a few yards from the platform. The bonfire lit her face with shades of orange and gold, creating a contrast with the serene but firm expression she carried. Her white hair, pulled back in a simple bun, gleamed with reflections from the fire. Her hands held the blue notebook against her chest, like a shield, like proof. Megan stopped speaking when she saw her mother position herself there, so close, so calm, so dangerously still. "Mom," she said, "you don't need to worry. We're doing this for you." Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She looked at each of her children, lingering on each face, taking in every detail. Then she looked at the surrounding community, at the neighbors she had known for decades, at the children she had cared for with her own hands during emergency afternoons, at the elders like herself who understood, perhaps better than anyone, the weight of that moment. "Daughter," she finally said, her voice low but clear, "I know exactly what you're doing." The silence that followed was one of those that weigh heavy, one of those that change the air around you. The bonfire crackled, sending sparks rising like specks of light into the dark sky. Julia took a step forward, small, hesitant, almost swallowed by her own conscience. Her siblings tried to hold her back with their eyes, but she no longer had the strength to sustain the lie. The tear that streamed down her face was the first of many that would still come that night. And so, in the center of that firelit yard, between truths beginning to reveal themselves and wounds that would bleed much before healing, the family prepared to face what no ritual could burn away. The choice between what was easy and what was right. No one yet knew how that night would end, but everyone felt, deep in their chest, that nothing would ever be the same. Julia's tear seemed to freeze time for an instant. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the bonfire seemed to burn lower as if respecting the weight of that moment. Eleanor watched her youngest daughter with a mix of pain and tenderness that only mothers can feel when they see their children lose and find themselves at the same time. Arthur took a few steps until he was beside his wife. Together they formed a figure the community knew well, the couple who had faced floods, droughts, losses and hardships without ever letting go of each other's hand. 51 years of marriage are not built easily. Every wrinkle on those faces told a story of resilience. "Julia," Eleanor said, extending her hand. "Come." "Here, sweetheart." The youngest hesitated. She looked at her siblings on the platform, at Megan's hardened face, at Robert's nervous expression. Then she looked at her parents, at those outstretched hands that had held her so many times when she was a child, when she was afraid of the dark, when she fell off her bike, when the world seemed too big. "I didn't want to," she whispered, her voice choked. "They said it was to help." Megan descended from the platform with heavy steps. "Julia, don't be foolish. We're doing what's best for everyone." "Best for whom?" Mr. Jack's voice cut through the air like a blade. The general store owner had approached, arms crossed, his gaze having seen much in that community. "Because I don't see anything good in this, Megan. I see children trying to take what their parents built." The murmur that swept through the community this time was louder. Some people nodded in agreement, others exchanged meaningful glances. The narrative the children had tried to build was beginning to crumble. Robert also descended from the platform, the envelope still in his hands. "Mr. Jack, with all due respect, you don't know anything. Our parents are getting old, confused. Last week my mother forgot a pan on the stove. My father can't remember where he keeps his keys. These are clear signs that they can no longer... I forgot the pan because I was helping the neighbor who felt ill, Eleanor interrupted, her voice calm but firm. And your father couldn't remember where he put the keys because you, Robert, moved them without telling him. You said it was to better organize the house. The silence that followed was revealing. Robert swallowed hard, his face slightly flushed. The setup had holes, and each hole that appeared exposed the truth more. Mrs. Sarah, the retired schoolteacher, took a step forward. She held an embroidered handkerchief that she twisted nervously, but her voice came out firm. I've known Arthur and Eleanor for over 40 years. They are some of the most lucid people I know. Eleanor still sews for half the community, does math in her head faster than anyone. And Arthur fixed my fence last week, a job a 30-year-old man couldn't handle. Other voices began to join in. Eleanor taught me how to make peach cobbler when I was newly married. Mr. Arthur lent me money when I lost my job and never asked for it back. They looked after my children when I had to travel in a hurry. Each testimony was a stone added to a wall of protection around the couple. The community, which the children had underestimated, was taking a stand. Not with violence, not with direct accusations, but with the silent strength of those who know the truth and won't let it be buried. Megan felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. The plan that had seemed so perfect in their secret meetings with her siblings now revealed its flaws. They had counted on their parents' passivity, on the community's indifference, on the shame that would prevent any reaction. They had not counted on dignity. You don't understand, she tried, her voice losing its previous firmness. It's not about money. It's about protection. Our parents need to be cared for, and we are their children. We have that responsibility. Daughter, Arthur said, speaking for the first time since the charade began. Caring for someone isn't taking away their rights. It's not fabricating documents. It's not shaming us in front of everyone. Her father's words hit Megan like a slap. She recoiled, a step, her eyes watering. There was something there, behind the mask of practicality she wore, something that hurt more than any accusation. Robert tried to take control. Dad, this document is fake, Robert. I never signed anything. Your mother never signed anything. And the entire community knows you're lying. The bonfire crackled, sending a larger spark spiraling upward before disappearing into the darkness. The ritual that was supposed to be about liberation had turned into a judgment, but not of the parents, of the children. Julia finally moved. She crossed the distance separating her from her parents, and threw herself into her mother's arms, sobbing as she hadn't since childhood. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry, Dad. I knew it was wrong, but they said it was for the best, that you'd thank us later, that... Eleanor hugged her tightly, stroking her daughter's hair with that tenderness that no betrayal can completely destroy. I know, honey. I know. Arthur placed a hand on his youngest daughter's shoulder, completing the circle of protection. The other two children watched the scene from a distance, excluded by their own choice, by pride, by shame. At that moment, a very elderly woman approached the bonfire. It was Mrs. Clara, the oldest matriarch in the community, almost 90 years old and possessing a wisdom everyone respected. She walked with the aid of a cane, but her eyes remained bright, attentive. I'm going to tell a story, she said, and her voice, though frail, carried a weight that silenced everyone. A story that happened many years ago, right here in this community. She positioned herself near the fire, letting the flames illuminate her wrinkled face. There was a man who was widowed early. He raised his children alone, worked day and night to give. them everything he could. When he grew old, his children began to think he was in the way. They said he was senile, that he couldn't take care of himself anymore. They took his house, his savings, his dignity. The community listened in absolute silence. Some already knew the story, others heard it for the first time. That man died alone, in a borrowed room at a neighbor's house who felt sorry for him. He died of sadness, not old age. And when his children went to divide the inheritance, they discovered there was nothing to divide. What truly had value they had already destroyed. Mrs. Clara looked directly at Megan and Robert. "Do you know who that man was?" Silence. "He was your grandfather, Arthur's father, and what you are doing tonight is exactly what they did to him. History repeating itself, generation after generation, until someone has the courage to break it." Arthur closed his eyes. The pain of that memory, which he had buried too deep, returned with full force. He remembered his father in his last months of life, thin, silent, with that look of someone who had given up fighting. He remembered himself too, young to understand, asking why his grandfather no longer lived in the big house. He remembered the half-answers, the changes of subject, the silence that covered the truth like a shroud of shame. Eleanor squeezed her husband's hand. She knew that story. Arthur had told it on a stormy night many years ago, when they were still newlyweds and making promises about the kind of family they wanted to build. "We promised it would be different," she whispered. "Remember?" He nodded, unable to speak. Mrs. Clara continued, "I was there when Arthur's father was put out of his own home. I saw the shame in his eyes. I saw the fear. I saw the loneliness that came after. And I swore to myself that as long as I lived, I would not let that happen again in this community." She struck her cane on the ground, a dry sound that echoed through the yard. "So I ask, are you going to let it?" The question hung in the air like both an accusation and a call. The residents looked at each other. It was not a rhetorical question. It was an invitation to choose a side. Mr. Jack was the first to speak. "I won't let it." Mrs. Sarah joined in. "Neither will I." One by one, the neighbors took their stand. Not with shouts or dramatic gestures, but with simple, firm words that built a wall of protection around the couple. Megan and Robert watched the community turn against them. The plan that had seemed so secure now left them exposed, alone, on the wrong side of an invisible line that divided the yard. "You don't understand," Megan tried once more, her voice now fragile. "We just wanted—" "What did you want?" Arthur interrupted, releasing Julia from his embrace, and walking until he was face to face with his oldest daughter. "Tell me, Megan. Look me in the eyes and tell me what you truly wanted." She tried to hold her father's gaze but couldn't. She averted her eyes to the ground, to the fire, to anywhere but those eyes that had known her since her first breath. "The house is worth a lot of money now," she murmured. "The land, the location. Buyers showed up offering a fortune. And you weren't going to live forever. So we thought that you could rush things," Arthur completed. "That you could get us out of the way while we're still alive." Each word was a knife. Megan felt the cut, felt shame burn her face, felt the weight of what she had done fall upon her shoulders like a sentence. Robert remained silent, the envelope now crumpled in his hands, his eyes fixed on the ground. The middle child, always the strategist, always the one who calculated every move, had nothing left to calculate. He had lost. The bonfire continued to burn, indifferent to the human drama unfolding around it. The flames consumed the wood with the same hunger as always, transforming wood into ash, solid into smoke. And perhaps, Eleanor thought, that was what fire taught, that everything can be transformed, that nothing is permanent, that even the worst pains can eventually turn into something different. But it was not yet time for transformation. There were still truths to be spoken, wounds to be fully opened before they began to heal. The night was still long. And what had begun as an ambush was becoming something very different. Something no one could have predicted. The wind shifted direction and brought with it the smell of rain that had not yet fallen. Eleanor looked up at the dark sky, dotted with stars that seemed to watch the drama from above, indifferent and eternal. How many nights like this had they witnessed? How many families had shattered and rebuilt under that same mantle of darkness? Julia was still crying, now softer, her sobs turning into long sighs. The youngest had always been the most sensitive of the three, the one who cried at sad movies, the one who took in abandoned animals, the one who could never lie without her face giving her away. Eleanor wondered how the other two had managed to convince her to participate in this. What promises had they made? What fears had they planted? "Do you want to tell me, honey?" Eleanor asked softly, pushing a strand of hair from Julia's wet face. "What did they tell you?" Julia sniffled, trying to control her breathing. "They said you were getting too old, that soon you'd need special care, expensive medicine, things we wouldn't be able to pay for. They said if we sold the house now, we'd have money to take care of you properly in a nice place, with nurses, with doctors." "A nursing home," Arthur said, the word coming out bitter. "They wanted to put us in a nursing home." "No," Julia quickly said. "They said it was a clinic, a beautiful retirement home, with a garden and—" "It's the same thing, honey," Eleanor interrupted gently. "Only the name changes." Megan, who had moved a few steps away, approached again. There was something different about her face now, a crack in the mask of practicality she always wore. "It's not the same thing," she said, her voice less harsh than before. "I researched. I visited places. There are retirement homes that are really good, where people are well treated, where children don't have to worry," Arthur completed, "where they can live their lives without the burden of caring for the old folks who raised them." "Dad, it's not like that." "Then what is it like, Megan? Explain it to me, because the way I see it, you wanted to take us out of our home, sell everything, divide the money, and stick us in a place to die out of your sight." The accusation hung in the air, heavy as lead. Megan opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. What could she say? That it wasn't true, that their intentions were good, that the end justified the means? Robert, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke up. "Dad, you're being unfair. We didn't want you to die. We wanted you to live well, without worries, without having to take care of an old house that needs constant repairs." "I like taking care of the house," Arthur said. "I built this house with my own hands, brick by brick, when you were still children. Every crack I fix is a memory. Every wall I paint is a story. Do you think I'd trade that for a clinic room with a view of a garden that isn't mine?" Eleanor placed a hand on her husband's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Arthur, calm down." "No, Eleanor, I can't be calm. Our children conspired against us, in front of everyone, with fake documents, trying to make us look like senile old folks who don't even remember our own names." His voice had risen, and the community paid attention to every word. It was rare to see Mr. Arthur upset. He was a man of gentle temper, infinite patience, and easy smiles. To see him like this, with eyes burning with suppressed anger, was unsettling. Mrs. Clara struck her cane on the ground again. "Let the man speak, Eleanor. There are things that need to come out, otherwise they rot inside." Eleanor hesitated, but nodded. The matriarch was right. Years of accumulated silence were there, years of small swallowed grievances, of unrecognized sacrifices, of love given without return. Arthur took a deep breath and continued. "I worked my whole life to give you what I didn't have. You went to good schools, had new clothes, never went hungry. When Megan wanted to go to college far away, I sold the only piece of land I had inherited from my father to pay for it. When Robert had that debt problem, I took money from my retirement savings to help. When Julia needed surgery, I worked double for 2 years to cover what the insurance didn't pay. Each revelation was a stone thrown into a calm lake, creating ripples that spread through the community. Many didn't know these details. Many now looked at the 3 children with expressions that mixed surprise and disappointment. "And what did I ask for in return?" Arthur continued. "Nothing. I never asked for anything because parents don't keep accounts with their children, but I at least expected respect. I at least expected that when I got old, you'd let me die in peace in my own home, with my wife by my side, looking at the garden Eleanor planted with so much care." Eleanor felt tears stream down her face. She didn't try to hold them back. There was no shame in crying for things that deserved tears. Megan fell to her knees. It was a sudden, unexpected movement that made everyone take a step back. The eldest daughter, always so controlled, always so practical, was now on her knees on the packed earth, her shoulders trembling. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she sobbed. "I thought I was protecting you. When I saw Mum forget things, when I saw Dad have trouble climbing the stairs, I got scared, afraid of losing you, afraid of not being prepared, afraid of—" Her voice broke. Megan covered her face with her hands, unable to continue. Robert knelt beside his sister, placing a hand on her shoulder. For a moment, it seemed he too would break, but he managed to maintain his composure. "She's telling the truth, Dad. We got scared. We saw you getting older and didn't know what to do. The plan for the house, the documents was a stupid idea, I know, but it wasn't out of malice. It was out of desperation." Arthur looked at his 2 children kneeling on the ground. Part of him wanted to yell, to accuse, to make them feel every drop of the pain they had caused. But another part, that fatherly part, that never completely disappears, felt his chest tighten at the sight. "Desperation," he repeated, his voice lower. "Now, desperation is what I felt when I saw my father thrown out of his own home. Desperation is what I promised I would never let happen to anyone I loved. And you—" He stopped, swallowed the rest of the sentence. He had more to say, much more, but the words refused to come out. Eleanor approached her kneeling children. She looked at them for a long moment, taking in every detail. Megan's tears, the tension in Robert's shoulders, the shame that emanated from both of them like fever heat. "Get up," she said, her voice soft but firm. They hesitated. "Get up," she repeated. "No one in my family kneels on the ground, not even to ask for forgiveness." With difficulty, Megan and Robert stood up. They faced their mother, eyes downcast, waiting for what would come next. "You made a mistake," Eleanor said. "A big one, but you're not the first children to make a mistake, and you won't be the last. What matters now is what you're going to do with that mistake." "Mom," Megan began. "Let me finish. You can spend the rest of your lives carrying this guilt, letting it poison everything, or you can learn from it. You can be better. You can prove with actions and not with words that you understand what you did wrong." The bonfire crackled, sending a shower of sparks. The wind brought the smell of wet earth, announcing the approaching rain. The community watched in silence, witnesses to a moment they knew was decisive. Mrs. Clara smiled, a small, wise smile. "Eleanor was always the smartest one in this family," she murmured to Mrs. Sarah. "She knows that anger fixes nothing." Arthur still remained apart, his arms crossed, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Eleanor knew him well enough to know he needed time. The wound was too deep to heal in one night. Julia, who had observed everything in silence, approached her siblings. "I should have spoken up sooner," she said. "I should have told you it was wrong. But I was afraid of being excluded, of you thinking I was ungrateful, that I didn't care about the family." "You're not ungrateful," Robert said, his voice hoarse. "You were the only one who had the courage to do the right thing. The only one who let the notebook fall, so Mom would find it." Megan looked at her younger sister with an expression that mixed surprise and something like admiration. "You did it on purpose?" Julia nodded. "I couldn't. When I took the notebook from Mum's purse, my hands were trembling so much I almost dropped it right there. Mum writes everything in that notebook, Grandma's recipes, birthdays, things Dad likes to eat. How could I destroy that? How could I let you destroy it?" The blue notebook was still in Eleanor's hands. She looked at it, running her fingers over the worn cover, over the yellowed pages from years of use. That simple object held, more than notes, it held an entire life. "This notebook," Eleanor said, holding it up for everyone to see, "was a gift from my father when I got married. He said, 'Daughter, write everything down, the good and the bad. One day you'll look back and understand that every page made sense.' I've had this notebook for 51 years, and you think I'd let you burn it in a bonfire?" She laughed, a short but genuine laugh that broke some of the tension. "My children, you underestimated your old mom. Do you think I didn't notice something was strange? That I didn't see the glances, the whispers, the meetings that stopped when I walked into the room?" Megan and Robert exchanged astonished looks. "I knew something was wrong weeks ago. I just didn't know exactly what. But one thing I've learned in these 70 years of life, when children start acting strange, it's time to pay attention." Arthur, despite everything, let out a smile. "Your mother was always smarter than all of us combined," he said. "I should have listened to her when she said something was off." "And I told you, didn't I?" Eleanor responded. "I said the boys were up to something. You just wanted to believe it was paranoia." I know. The couple exchanged a look that carried 51 years of history. They didn't need words. They never had. The first raindrops began to fall, spaced out, heavy, hitting the dry earth with dull thuds. The community began to move, some seeking shelter, others simply lifting their faces to feel the cool water. But the family remained there, motionless, as if the rain was part of the ritual, as if they needed to be washed clean of that night before moving on. And perhaps that was exactly it. Perhaps the rain knew what they had not yet understood, that some pains need water to begin to heal. The rain fell harder, and the community took shelter under the canvas covering that protected part of the yard. The bonfire resisted, the flames stubbornly fighting against the drops that managed to penetrate the makeshift awning. The fire seemed unwilling to die that night, as if it had more to witness. Mr. Jack arranged chairs and benches for the elders. Mrs. Sarah brought coffee from a thermos she always carried to community events. The warm, familiar scent mingled with that of wet earth, creating an atmosphere that was both welcoming and tense. Arthur accepted a cup of coffee, more out of politeness than desire. His hands still trembled slightly, and he tried to disguise it by holding the cup with both hands. Eleanor sat beside him, her leg touching his, that small gesture of presence they always made when one needed strength. The three children remained standing, out of place, unsure where to position themselves. The community that had once been neutral territory now seemed hostile, each gaze a reminder of what they had tried to do. Mrs. Clara settled into a chair near the bonfire, her cane resting between her legs. "Sit down, children," she said to Megan, Robert and Julia, pointing to an empty bench. "There's more to tell, and you need to hear it." They sat, reluctant but obedient. There was something in the matriarch's voice that did not admit refusal. "I told you about your grandfather," Mrs. Clara began. "I told you how he was treated by his own children. But I didn't tell you everything. I didn't tell you the part that hurts the most." The rain continued to fall, creating a sheet of water around the cover. The sound of the drops hitting the canvas formed a constant, almost hypnotic soundtrack. Arthur's father had 4 children. 4. And do you know how many showed up at his funeral? Silence. 1. Only Arthur. The other three made up excuses, commitments, illnesses that didn't exist. They didn't want to face the guilt. They didn't want to look at the coffin and admit what they had done. Arthur lowered his eyes. That memory still hurt, even after so many years. "I was at that funeral," Mrs. Clara continued. "I saw Arthur, alone, carrying his father's coffin with the help of neighbors because his brothers didn't show up. I saw him crying afterward, hidden behind the chapel, thinking no one saw him, and I swore I would tell this story whenever necessary, so it would never be repeated." Megan felt her stomach churn. She knew parts of that story, fragments her father sometimes let slip, but she had never heard it like this, with so many details, with such raw truth. "What I mean by this," the matriarch looked directly at the three siblings, "is that you still have time. Your parents are still alive. You can still fix things. But if you wait too long, if you let pride speak louder, you'll end up like your uncles, carrying a guilt that cannot be mended." Robert swallowed hard. The image of his father carrying his grandfather's coffin virtually alone was etched in his mind. "We didn't mean to," he began. "What you meant no longer matters," Mrs. Clara interrupted. "What matters is what you're going to do now. Are you going to keep justifying yourselves, or are you going to act?" The question hung in the air, heavy as the rain falling outside. Megan stood up. She walked to where her parents were sitting and knelt again, this time not out of shame, but with purpose. "Dad, Mom, I made a mistake. I'm not going to make excuses. I made a mistake because I was selfish, because I thought about money, because I let fear turn into pettiness." She took the document Robert had presented on the platform from her pocket. "This paper is fake. The signature was copied from another document. I paid someone to do it. I paid to falsify my own parents' signatures." The murmur that swept through the community was one of astonishment. It was one thing to suspect. It was another to hear the direct confession. "I'm going to destroy this now," Megan continued, "in front of everyone, so no one can ever use it against you again." She stood up and walked to the bonfire. She held the paper over the flames, hesitating for a moment. "Wait," Arthur said. Megan froze. "Don't burn it yet." She turned, confused. Arthur slowly stood up, his joints protesting after sitting for so long. He walked to his daughter and took the document from her hands. "This paper," he said, looking at the sheet, "is proof of a crime. Document forgery. If I wanted to, I could take you to the police station right now." Fear crossed the faces of the three children. "But I'm not going to do that," Arthur continued. "Do you know why? Because you are my children. And no matter how much you've erred, no matter how much you've disappointed me, I'm not going to destroy your lives because of one mistake. Even a mistake this big." He folded the paper carefully and put it in his shirt pocket. "I'm going to keep this, not as a threat, but as a reminder, so you never forget what you almost did, so that when you have children, you remember this night and treat them differently than you treated us." Eleanor also stood up and went to her husband's side. "What your father is saying," she added, "is that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. We can forgive you and we will forgive you because that's what parents do, but the trust you broke will take time to rebuild, a lot of time." Robert approached. "We accept any condition, anything you ask for." "I only ask one thing," Arthur said, "that you never do this again. To anyone, not to us, nor to other people, that you learn that money isn't worth more than dignity, that inheritance isn't worth more than love." Julia was crying again, but this time they were different tears. Tears of relief, perhaps, of hope. "Dad, I promise," she said. "I promise I'll truly take care of you, not to take anything, not to gain anything, just because I love you." Arthur looked at his youngest daughter and felt something release inside his chest. The youngest had always been different. She had always had a heart that overflowed through her eyes. "I know you love me, honey. I never doubted you." The embrace that followed was one of those that heal. Arthur hugged Julia tightly, feeling her tears wet his shirt, feeling the tremor of her small body against his. Eleanor joined the embrace, enveloping both of them. For a long moment they stood like that, three figures intertwined in the middle of the yard, illuminated by the fire and surrounded by the rain. Megan and Robert watched from a distance, excluded. They knew they couldn't enter that circle. Not yet, not after what they had done. The community began to disperse little by little. Some said goodbye with waves, others with murmured words of support. Mrs. Clara was helped by Mr. Jack to her house, but before leaving, she looked back one last time. "You'll be all right," she said to the couple. "I knew you would." When most had already left, only the family and a few close neighbors remained under the canvas cover. The rain began to weaken, the drops more spaced out now. Mrs. Sarah approached Eleanor. "Do you need anything, dear? I can stay if you need." "No, Sarah, thank you. I think we need to be alone for a bit, to sort things out as a family." The retired schoolteacher nodded and walked away, but not without casting a stern glance at Megan and Robert, a look that said more than words could express. When finally only the five of them remained, silence settled. It wasn't a comfortable silence, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the silence of those who have much to say and don't know where to start. Arthur was the first to break it. "The house is not for sale." Megan opened her mouth to respond, but he raised his hand. "Let me finish. The house is not for sale while your mother and I are alive. When we die, you can do whatever you want with it. You can sell it, divide the money, make a bonfire with the furniture. I won't be here to care anymore." "Dad," Robert tried. "I'm not finished yet. From now on, your mother and I will manage our own finances, without interference. If we need help, we'll ask. But you will no longer have access to our accounts, our documents, anything. You've lost that right." The words were harsh but fair. The children knew it. A nod was all they could manage. "And one more thing," Arthur continued. "You're going to visit us every Sunday. Not to look at what we have, not to take inventory, to have lunch, to talk, to be a real family like we used to be before you became obsessed with inheritance." Eleanor smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I'll make that baked chicken and rice you loved when you were kids. Remember, with potatoes and carrots." The memory flashed through the three siblings like lightning. Childhood Sundays, the house filled with the smell of food, their father joking in the kitchen, their mother shooing everyone out so they wouldn't get in the way. Simpler times, better times. "I remember," Julia said, her voice choked. "It was the best food in the world. Then it settled, next Sunday noon, and woe to anyone who misses it. It was an order, not an invitation, but it was also an offer of peace, a bridge extended over the chasm they had dug. The bonfire had diminished considerably, now just embers pulsing in shades of orange and red. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and fresh. In the sky, some stars began to appear between the dispersing clouds. Arthur looked at the almost extinguished fire. "Do you know what I was going to burn tonight?" he asked no one in particular. "An old photo of my father, one that's been with me since he died." Eleanor looked at her husband, surprised. "You never told me that." "I was saving it. I thought it was time to let go of the grudge I still held against my brothers, the anger at how they treated him. I thought burning the photo would help me forgive." He took a small, time-yellowed photograph from his other pocket, a middle-aged man, thick moustache, serious but kind eyes. "My father was a good man," Arthur said. "Hard-working, honest, never harmed anyone. He didn't deserve the end he had. Megan, Robert and Julia looked at the photo, seeing for the first time the face of the grandfather they had barely known. "He looks like you, Dad," Julia said. "Everyone said that. He even had the same calloused hands from so much work." Arthur looked at the photo for another moment, then put it back in his pocket. "I won't burn it, not today. Today I realized that keeping his memory isn't keeping a grudge, it's keeping love. And we don't burn love." Eleanor took her husband's hand and squeezed it. "Never." The night wore on, and somewhere a rooster crowed out of season, confused by the lights that still shone in the yard. The community slept, but there, under that canvas cover, a family tried to find its way back. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be fast. But for the first time that night, it seemed possible. The days that followed that night were strange, as if time had acquired a different texture. In Arthur and Eleanor's home, the routine continued seemingly the same. Breakfast at 6, the newspaper read on the porch, tending to the garden Eleanor had cultivated for decades. But there was something in the air, a lightness that hadn't existed before, as if a storm had passed and left behind a cleaner sky. Eleanor woke up on Thursday with the sun streaming through the bedroom window. Arthur was no longer in bed, which meant he must be in the yard, talking to the chickens as he did every morning. She smiled at the thought, 51 years married and her husband still had habits that made her smile. She got up slowly, feeling her joints protest as they always did on cold mornings. She walked to the window and looked out. There he was, indeed, squatting near the chicken coop, throwing corn to the clucking birds. "Stubborn old man," she murmured fondly. "The doctor said not to squat too long." She carefully descended the stairs, holding the handrail Arthur had installed when she started complaining about dizziness. Such were the gestures of love between them, silent, practical, without grand declarations. A handrail installed. Tea prepared without asking. A blanket placed over shoulders. During an afternoon nap. In the kitchen, coffee was already brewed. Arthur had left the thermos ready, along with a warm biscuit left over from the day before. Eleanor poured a cup and went to the porch, where she liked to watch the sun rise over the mountains that surrounded the community. The blue notebook lay on the coffee table, where she had left it the night before. After all the drama of the ceremony, she felt the need to flip through it, to recall each page, each note. It was like revisiting her own life, compressed into small letters and carefully recorded dates. She opened to a random page, March 15th, 1998. Megan's 10th birthday, chocolate cake with fudge frosting. She asked for a pink bike. We gave her a red one because it was cheaper. She cried at first, then loved it. Eleanor smiled as she read. She remembered that day clearly. Megan, so small, so full of expectations, and the initial disappointment when she saw the bike wasn't the color she wanted. But then when she learned to ride and realized the color didn't matter, that what mattered was the freedom of pedaling through the neighborhood with the wind in her face. Where had that girl gone? What had happened to her over the years that transformed her into the woman who conspired against her own parents for money? The answer, Eleanor knew, wasn't simple. Life shapes people, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Disappointments accumulate, pressures grow, priorities shift. Megan had married young, to a man who seemed good, but turned out to be controlling. She divorced at 30, returned home to her parents for a while, struggled to rebuild her life. That period had been difficult. Eleanor remembered the nights her daughter cried, in her room, thinking no one heard. Perhaps that's where everything had started to change. Perhaps the experience of the failed marriage had planted in Megan a thirst for security that manifested as an obsession with money, with control, with guarantees. It didn't justify what she had done, but perhaps it explained it. Arthur appeared on the porch, his hands dirty with earth. Thinking about life, he asked, sitting in the chair beside her. Thinking about the children. It was his usual response when he didn't know what to say. A that could mean agreement, reflection, or simply presence. Do you think we made a mistake somewhere, Arthur, when we raised them? He remained silent for a moment, looking at the mountains. Every father and mother makes mistakes, Eleanor. There's no manual. We do what we can with what we have. But what if we had done things differently? If we had given less, demanded more, taught other things? If we had done things differently, they would be different people. And perhaps those other people would have other problems, other flaws. There's no way to know. Eleanor took a sip of her coffee, which had already cooled a bit. Julia sent me a text message early this morning, asked if she could come for lunch today. Arthur raised his eyebrows. Alone? She said yes, said she wanted to talk. And what did you say? That she could come, that I'd make that baked chicken and rice she likes. Arthur nodded. The youngest had always been closer, more open, more willing to cross the bridge their parents extended. The other two were prouder, more reserved. What about the others? He asked. Megan hasn't shown any sign. Robert sent a formal message, apologizing again. It sounded like a rehearsed speech. His wife must have written it. Eleanor let out a short laugh. Probably. That woman was always more polite than him. The sun had risen completely, warming the porch with a golden light. Birds sang in the branches of the mango tree that shaded part of the yard. It was a beautiful morning, one of those that make you remember why it's worth being alive. Julia arrived around noon, bringing a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked along the way. You didn't have to, honey, Eleanor said as she received the flowers. I wanted to. I thought they were pretty. And I thought of you. It was a simple gesture, but significant. The small gestures always were. Lunch was quiet. Baked chicken and rice, green salad, fresh orange juice. They talked about pleasantries at first. The weather, community gossip, the new priest who had arrived at the parish. They avoided the main topic like someone avoids a pothole in the middle of the road. It was Arthur who finally broke the silence. Honey, did you come here just to eat baked chicken and rice, or do you have something you want to say? Julia lowered her eyes to her plate. I wanted to explain, to tell you how it all started. I think you deserve to know. Eleanor put her cutlery aside and clasped her hands on the table. Then tell us. The youngest took a deep breath, gathering courage. It was Megan who first had the idea. About 6 months ago, she was having money problems, her job wasn't going well, and she started talking about how your house was worth a fortune now, with the development of the area. At first it was just talk, you know. She'd talk and we'd listen without taking it too seriously. Arthur, nodded for her to continue. But then she started researching, found out how much the house could be worth if it was sold, how much each of us would receive. And the numbers were high, Dad. Very high. Enough to solve all her problems, to make a down payment on an apartment, to pay off debts. And Robert? Eleanor asked. Robert joined later. He was also struggling with his children's expenses, private school, car payments. When Megan showed him the numbers, it was like a switch flipped. Suddenly your house wasn't just the house we grew up in anymore. It was an asset, an opportunity. The word asset sounded strange in Julia's mouth, as if it didn't belong in her vocabulary. And you? Arthur asked. How did you get into this? Julia felt her eyes well up. They pressured me. They said I was part of the family, that I had a right to my share too, that if I didn't participate, I'd be left out when the money was divided. And I'm afraid of being alone, Dad, of being excluded. So I agreed, even though I knew it was wrong. Eleanor reached out and took her daughter's hand. You wouldn't have been left out of anything, my dear, never. I know now. But at the time, with them talking in my ear, it seemed to make sense. It seemed like we were doing the right thing, protecting you, securing everyone's future. Arthur stood up and went to the window, looking out. And the fake document? The forged signatures? Julia swallowed hard. That was Robert's idea. He knew someone, a guy who does that kind of thing. They paid $3,000 for the forgery. Megan gave him the money, and the plan was what? To use that document to declare us incompetent, to take control of everything while we were still alive. It wasn't to declare you incompetent, it was to transfer administration. They were going to present the document at the county clerk's office, say you had agreed, and from then on they could make decisions about the property without consulting you. The silence that followed was heavy. Eleanor felt her stomach sink as she heard the extent of the plan. It was worse than she imagined, much worse. And after they had control, she asked, her voice low, they were going to sell the house. They even had an interested buyer, an out-of-town developer who wants to build a subdivision in the area. He offered a very high price with cash payment. Arthur turned to face his daughter. And us? Where were we going to live? Julia lowered her eyes, unable to meet her father's gaze. They had found a retirement home. They said it was good, that you would like it, that it was better than being here alone. But I knew, Dad. I knew that wasn't what you wanted. I knew you would never accept leaving here. Tears streamed down Julia's face now, uncontrollably. That's why I let the notebook fall. That's why I couldn't go through with it. Because when I saw you two arriving in the yard, holding hands as always, I remembered everything. How you took care of us, how you never asked for anything in return, how this house is you. And I couldn't. I just couldn't. Eleanor stood up and went to her daughter, hugging her from behind. You did the right thing in the end, honey. That's what matters. Arthur remained at the window, processing everything he had heard. The betrayal was deeper than he imagined. It wasn't just an impulsive decision, a momentary error. It was an elaborate plan, with months of preparation, with money invested, with a buyer already arranged. His own children had treated the house where he had lived for 50 years as a commodity. They had calculated the value of the walls he had built with his own hands, the garden Eleanor cultivated with so much love, the rooms where the children had grown up. And what was worse, they had planned to do all this while he and Eleanor were still alive, conscious, perfectly capable of making their own decisions. "Thank you for telling us, honey," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "I know it wasn't easy." Julia sniffled, trying to control her crying. "Do you forgive me? Truly?" Arthur turned and looked at his youngest daughter. He saw in her the little girl who used to jump into his lap asking for stories, the teenager who cried when she argued with friends, the young woman who called every week to ask how her parents were. "I forgive you, honey. Your mother forgives you. But the other two will have to earn that forgiveness. It won't be free." It was fair. It was the least. Julia nodded, accepting the sentence. Outside, the sun continued to shine, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding under its warmth. The mango trees swayed gently in the afternoon breeze, and somewhere a bird sang a melody that seemed in some way fitting for the moment. Sunday arrived laden with expectation. Eleanor woke up earlier than usual, restless, and went straight to the kitchen to prepare the lunch she had promised. The roast chicken required time, seasoning the day before, letting it rest, roasting slowly so it would be tender inside and golden brown outside. It was a recipe she had been making for decades, passed down by her mother, who in turn had learned it from her grandmother. 3 generations of women condensed into one dish. Arthur watched her from the kitchen doorway, holding a cup of coffee. "Do you think they'll come?" he asked. "Julia will definitely come. The other 2, I don't know." "If they don't, there'll be more chicken for us." Eleanor smiled. but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "I want them to come, Arthur. No matter how much they've erred, they're still our children." He nodded and went to the porch, carrying the silent weight of a father torn between resentment and love. The sun slowly climbed, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was one of those clear autumn days, when the air is crisp but the sun warms, when the world seems sharper, more defined. Arthur liked these mornings. They gave the impression that anything was possible, that new beginnings existed. Julia arrived at 11, punctual as always. She brought a cornbread she had made the day before, following her mother's recipe. "Is it good?" Eleanor asked, tasting a piece. "Almost as good as yours. It'll be just as good when you have 50 years of practice." They laughed together, a laugh that eased the accumulated tension. At noon, no sign of the other two. Eleanor looked out the window at every car that passed on the street, hoping to see Megan's or Robert's vehicle. None appeared. "Maybe they're just running late," Julia said, trying to be optimistic. "Maybe," Arthur replied, without conviction. At 12:30, Eleanor decided she wouldn't wait any longer. She put the food on the table, arranged the plates, filled the juice pitcher. If the children came, there would be food. If they didn't, life went on. That's when Robert's car pulled up in front of the house. Eleanor felt her heart quicken. She saw her son get out of the car, followed by his wife and their two small grandchildren. Behind them, another car, Megan's, alone. "They came," she murmured, almost disbelieving. Arthur got up from the sofa where he had been sitting. He straightened his back, crossed his arms, preparing for what was to come. The door opened, and Robert entered first, carrying his younger son. His wife, Carol, came right behind him with their 5-year-old daughter by the hand. "Dad, Mom, sorry we're late." It was an apology for the lateness, not for the rest, but it was a start. Megan entered next, her eyes downcast, her hands clutching her purse strap as if she needed something to hold on to. "Hi," she said, her voice small. "Hi, honey," Eleanor replied. "Come in, food's on the table." Lunch began in awkward silence. The grandchildren, oblivious to the adults' tension, chatted about childish things, the cartoon they had seen on TV, the neighbor's dog, school starting next week. Their innocent laughter filled the voids the adults couldn't. Eleanor watched her. Children as they ate. Robert chewed slowly, avoiding looking at his parents. Megan barely touched her plate, pushing food from one side to the other with her fork. Julia tried to maintain conversation, commenting on the weather, the flowers in the garden, anything that wasn't the elephant in the room. It was the older grandson, Peter, 7 years old, who broke the ice. "Grandpa, why are you sad?" The question, in the brutal innocence of children, hit Arthur like a punch. "I'm not sad, son." "Yes, you are. You have the same look I get when I fight with Mary, and we're not talking." Mary was his younger sister, the 5-year-old girl who now looked at her grandfather with wide, curious eyes. "Did Grandpa fight with someone?" she asked. The silence that followed was deafening. The adults exchanged glances, not knowing what to say. How to explain to children what had happened, how to translate betrayal, forgery, greed into words that made sense to such young minds. It was Megan who finally spoke, her voice choked. "It wasn't exactly a fight, Mary. It was a disagreement among the adults, but we're working it out. When Mary and I fight, Mom says to apologize and give a hug," Peter said with the simple wisdom of 7 years. "Have you apologized?" Megan closed her eyes. The tears she tried to hold back streamed down her face, silent. "Not yet, as I should, my love, but I will now." She stood up from her chair and walked to where her parents were sitting. She knelt before them, as she had done on the night of the bonfire, but this time there was something different in her eyes. It wasn't just shame, it was true remorse, the kind that comes from deep within, that hurts because it's real, Dad, Mom, I know apologies don't erase what I did. I know you may never trust me again as you did before, but I need you to know. I was wrong. Completely wrong. I let fear and greed take over me, and I almost destroyed the most important thing I have. Arthur looked at his kneeling daughter. He saw in her the girl she had been, the woman she had become, the choices she had made. He also saw the pain, the regret, the vulnerability of someone who exposes themselves without guarantees. "What do you want, Megan?" he asked, his voice low. "What do you truly want?" She looked up, meeting her father's eyes. "I want my parents back. Not the house, not the money, not the inheritance. I want to be able to come here on Sunday and have lunch with you. I want my children to grow up knowing their grandparents. I want the chance to take care of you when you need it for real, not to gain anything just because I love you." Her voice broke on the last word. Megan lowered her head, sobbing. Eleanor stood up and pulled her daughter into a hug. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Some things can only be communicated by touch, by the warmth of the body, by the pressure of arms that embrace. Robert also stood up, his eyes moist. "Dad, I also need to—" Arthur raised his hand, interrupting him. "I heard your sister. Now I want to hear you. Not what you think I want to hear. What you truly feel." Robert swallowed hard. It was harder for him, it always had been. Words didn't come easily. Emotions got stuck somewhere between his chest and his throat. "I felt envy, Dad," he finally said. "My whole life I felt envy. Of you and Mom. Of your marriage, of your house, of the way people respect you. I never managed to build anything like that. My marriage is good, but it's not like yours. My house is rented. My job is unstable." He paused, taking a deep breath. "And when Megan came with the idea of the house, it was like a voice inside me said, 'Now you can have it. You can have security, you can have stability, you can stop feeling inferior.' It was a lie, I know. But at the time it felt true." Arthur listened in silence. He didn't interrupt, he didn't judge, he just listened. "I'm not a good son," Robert continued. "I never was. Julia is the good one, the one who calls every week, the one who truly cares. I'm the middle one, the one who gets lost in the middle, the one no one notices. And I got tired of being invisible. I wanted to be important. I wanted you to need me. I thought if I managed the finances, if I made the decisions, I'd finally have a place in this family." "You always had a place," Arthur said, his voice firm but gentle. "Since the day you were born. You're not invisible to me, Robert. Never were." "Then why did you never tell me that?" The question caught Arthur by surprise. He opened his mouth to answer, but realized he didn't have a ready answer. "Because I'm not good with words either, son. Because I thought you knew. Because—" He stopped, searching for the honesty he demanded from his children. "Because I made mistakes too. I thought giving things was the same as giving love. I thought working hard and paying the bills was enough. I didn't realize you needed more, to be heard, to talk, to know you were important." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It was a silence of recognition, of truths finally spoken, of masks finally fallen. Carol, Robert's wife, who had been quiet until then, spoke up. "Maybe it's time for all of you to hug and stop crying. The children are getting scared." Everyone looked at Peter and Mary, who observed the adults with confused expressions. Peter was almost crying too, from emotional contagion. Mary held her brother's hand, trying to be brave. Eleanor laughed through her tears. "Carol's right. Come here, my grandkids. Come hug Grandma." The children ran to their grandmother's embrace, and suddenly everyone was hugging. Eleanor, Arthur, Megan, Robert, Julia, Carol, Peter, Mary. A tangle of arms and tears and laughter, an imperfect family trying to rebuild itself. It wasn't the end. Arthur knew that. Trust would take time to rebuild. Wounds would leave scars. But there, in that collective embrace, there was something that hadn't existed for a long time: hope. When they finally broke apart, everyone had red eyes and shy smiles on their faces. The food had grown cold on the table, but no one cared. "I'll warm up the chicken," Eleanor said, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I'll help," Megan offered. "Me too," Julia said. The three women went to the kitchen, leaving the men in the living room. Arthur looked at Robert, at the grandchildren playing on the rug, at the walls of the house he had built, brick by brick. "You know it's not going to be easy," he said. "I know, Dad. It'll take time for me to trust you again. I know. But I'm willing to try. Are you?" Robert nodded, his eyes still moist. "We are, Dad. We are." Outside, the afternoon sun lit Eleanor's garden. The flowers she had cultivated for years swayed gently in the breeze, coloring the world with shades of red, yellow, and orange. It was an ordinary garden, nothing extraordinary, but it was hers. It was theirs. And no one was going to take it as long as they could defend it. The months that followed were like slow stitching, stitch by stitch, mending the fabric that had been torn. Sunday lunches became a tradition again, but now they had a different flavor. There was an honesty in the conversations that hadn't existed before, a willingness to talk about difficult things instead of sweeping them under the rug. Megan started showing up more often during the week. Sometimes she brought food, sometimes she just stopped by for coffee and a chat. She told stories about work, problems with her old car, small daily victories. Eleanor listened attentively, asking questions, showing genuine interest. These were conversations that should have happened years ago, but which now finally found space. Robert also changed, though more subtly. He called every Wednesday evening, promptly at 8, to talk to his father. At first, the conversations were short, truncated, full of awkward silences. Over time, they lengthened. Arthur discovered things about his son he had never realized. That he liked woodworking, that he dreamed of building furniture with his own hands, that he admired his father more than he had ever been able to express. "You could come over this weekend," Arthur said on one of those calls. "I have a workbench in the backyard that I haven't used in years. We could build something together." Silence on the other end of the line lasted a few seconds. "Really, Dad? You'd want to?" "I'd like that." The following Saturday, Robert showed up with new tools and an ambitious project, a coffee table for his parents' living room. They spent the entire afternoon sawing, sanding, measuring. Arthur taught techniques he had learned from his own father decades ago. Robert absorbed every word like a sponge, happy to finally have something that connected them beyond family obligations. The table was finished after 3 weekends of work. It wasn't perfect. It had some imperfections, some corners that didn't align completely. But it was theirs. When they placed it in the living room, in the spot of the old table, Eleanor cried. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she said, running her hand over the wooden surface. "It's just a table, Mom," Robert said, embarrassed. "It's not just a table. It's you and your father together. That's what's beautiful." Julia continued to be the bridge between everyone. It was she who organized gatherings, who remembered birthdays, who mediated when tension threatened to resurface. She had found her place in the family not as the invisible youngest, but as the heart that kept everyone connected. One day, a few months after the Bonfire incident, she arrived at her parents' house with news. "I'm dating," she announced, her cheeks flushed. Eleanor dropped what she was doing and hugged her. "Oh, honey, tell me everything. Who is he? How did you two meet?" "His name is Luke. He works at Mr. Anthony's bakery. We met when I went to buy bread, and he gave me an extra one for free." Arthur laughed. "Started well, that young man, already showing he's generous." Julia smiled, that smile that lit up her entire face. "He's very kind, Dad. Very caring. He takes care of his sick mother, works mornings and studies at night. He's not rich, doesn't have a car, nothing special. But when he looks at me, I feel like the most important person in the world. That's what matters, honey, Eleanor said. Money comes and goes, kindness stays. Luke was introduced to the family the following Sunday. He was a slender young man with calloused hands and a shy smile. He greeted his potential in-laws with respect, complimented Eleanor's cooking, listened to Arthur's stories with genuine attention. When he left in the late afternoon, Eleanor turned to her husband. I like him. Me too. Do you think he's good for Julia? I think Julia is an adult and knows how to choose, and I think anyone who treats their sick mother with kindness has their heart in the right place. Spring arrived, bringing new flowers to Eleanor's garden. She planted sunflowers that year, something she had never tried before. She said she wanted to see something tall and yellow growing in the yard, something that pointed to the sky as if giving thanks for the sun. Arthur helped her prepare the soil, dig the holes, water the seeds. It was a slow, meditative work they did together every morning before breakfast. They didn't talk much during these moments. They didn't need to. The silent companionship was enough. When the sunflowers finally bloomed, tall and proud, Eleanor took a picture and sent it to her children. Look what your father and I made, she wrote in the message. The replies came shortly after. Megan sent a heart emoji. Robert said it was beautiful. Julia asked if she could bring Luke to see them. Small gestures, small connections, small proofs that the family, despite everything, still existed. The bonfire. Ceremony returned the following autumn. Eleanor and Arthur went, this time without tension, without fear of what might happen. The children also went, each bringing something to burn. Megan brought the business card of the document forger. She tore it into small pieces before throwing them into the flames. Never again, she said softly. Never again. Robert brought a list he had made months earlier with calculations of how much his parents' house would be worth, how much each would receive in the division. He burned it without saying anything, but the gesture spoke for itself. Julia brought an envelope with old family photos from when they were all little. She didn't burn them. She just showed them to her parents, to her siblings, to Luke, who stood beside her. I don't want to burn anything, she said. I want to remember, the good and the bad, so I never forget where we came from. Arthur took the photos and looked at them one by one. There was one in particular from an Easter Sunday more than 30 years ago. He, Eleanor, and the 3 children all squeezed onto the living room sofa, smiling at the camera. Megan must have been about 10, Robert 7, Julia still a baby in her mother's lap. We were happy, he said, and we didn't know it. We still are, Dad, Julia said. It just took a scare to remind us. Mrs. Clara was present, leaning on her cane, observing everything with those eyes that had seen almost a century of history. When the family approached to greet her, she held Arthur's hand. I told you you'd be all right, she murmured. I knew it. You always know, Mrs. Clara. It's not knowing, it's believing. And I believe in people, even when they make mistakes. Because to err is human. What matters is what we do afterward. The bonfire burned brightly, casting light on the gathered faces. The community chatted, laughed, shared stories. It was a night like so many others, yet unique. Because every night is unique, every moment is unrepeatable, every passing second never comes back. Eleanor approached her husband and rested her head on his shoulder. 52 years of marriage now. Their anniversary had been the previous month, celebrated with a simple dinner at home, with all their children present. What are you thinking about? She asked. How strange life is. A year ago, I thought I had lost my children. Now I'm here looking at them, and I feel like I know them better than ever. Sometimes things need to break to be truly fixed. Yeah, sometimes they do. The grandchildren ran around the yard, playing with other children from the community. Peter was already 8, Mary 6. They grew fast, as all children do. Soon they would be teenagers, then adults, then they would have their own children. The cycle would continue, generation after generation, with all its pains and joys. Arthur thought of his father, of the grandfather his grandchildren never knew, of the man who had died alone and sad. He thought of the promise he had made to himself, still young, never to let that happen to his own family. It almost had happened. Almost. But almost doesn't count. Eleanor took the blue notebook from her purse. She had brought it to the ceremony, though she didn't know exactly why. She opened it to a blank page and wrote, Autumn 2024, bonfire ceremony, family gathered, children present, grandchildren playing. Arthur by my side. All is well. They were simple words, but sufficient. Sometimes simple words are the best. The night wore on. The bonfire dwindled. People gradually dispersed. The children said goodbye with long hugs, promises to return on Sunday, recommendations for their parents to take care of themselves. When they were finally alone, Arthur and Eleanor walked back to the house, slowly, hand in hand as they had since their first date, more than 5 decades ago. "Are you happy?" Arthur asked. "I am. And you?" "I am. Tired, but happy." "That's a good combination." They went into the house, turned on the lights, prepared for bed. The usual routine, brushing teeth, taking medicines, checking if the doors were locked. Small rituals that built the structure of everyday life. In bed, before turning off the light, Eleanor turned to her husband. "Arthur?" "Thank you for not giving up." He didn't reply with words. He just took her hand and squeezed it, that gesture that said more than any sentence could say. Outside, the stars shone over the sleeping community. The bonfire had already turned to embers. Soon it would be ash. But the warmth it had generated remained, invisible, in the hearts of all who had been there. And Arthur and Eleanor's house still stood, firm, full of memories and life. It wasn't the prettiest house, nor the biggest, nor the most valuable, but it was theirs. It was history. It was love transformed into walls, into windows, into doors that opened to welcome anyone who wanted to enter. Eleanor's garden would continue to bloom every spring. Arthur's workbench would continue to produce imperfect but heartfelt furniture. The children would continue to come on Sundays, bringing food, bringing grandchildren, bringing that noisy mess that only large families can make. And when it was time to leave, because that time comes for everyone, Arthur and Eleanor would leave together in their own homes, surrounded by those they loved, not because their children had allowed it, because they had decided it. If this story touched your heart, like, comment, and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be remembered.